Welcome to another episode of the Reception Perception Mailbag. It's been way too long since we've done one of these. But hey, let's get back into it. A lot more charting is in the books. Way more NFL players are on the website. So I think it's time to reach out to the RP Discord community and see what burning questions you all have as training camp is upon us and the season is rapidly approaching. So let's waste no more time. Let's get into it. All right, our first question comes in from Yanter in the RP Discord. The latest buzz in Buffalo is that they're incorporating a lot more motion and condensed formation into their offense. If those carry over into the regular season, how would you anticipate it affecting your expectations for the Bills receivers, especially Keon Coleman? In other words, would that make you less concerned about him playing X as it's less time spent out wide on an island? This is a great question, Yanter, and I'm glad we're talking about the Bills receivers here for a variety of different reasons. First of all, I have been sent approximately 100 tweets from Bills beat writers about Keon Coleman playing in the slot. Anything that has the words Keon Coleman and slot in it have been sent to me, whether it's tagging on Twitter, DMs, text messages, in the RP Discord itself. Yeah, I've gotten that message a ton. I've seen all of those tweets, and it's been great. Anthony from Cover One at @pro__ant has primarily been the one posting about this, doing great work. And yes, I love to hear this. Also love to see some of the tweets that have been sent, less so, but the tweets have been sent about Curtis Samuel playing in motion, playing all over the formation. I think this is great news. Actually had a really good conversation briefly about this with Nate Tice on our new Yahoo show, Football 301. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and shows, as if you don't get enough of me already if you're watching this channel. I think this is a critical thing to talk about with these wide receivers because, yes, I don't think that the Bills are just going to be a strict 11 personnel team with the same three receivers on the field for 100% of the snaps and all these guys out in isolated routes and situations. I think there's going to be a lot of movement here. The fact that they are playing Keon in the slot a good bit is critical. There's another video on the channel, we'll link it here, where I went over the history of prospects that have Keon Coleman's success rate versus man and press coverage numbers. All of those guys that fell below the 35th percentile in success rate versus man and press that went on to have sustained career success in the NFL, they all moved to be at least primary slot receivers. I do think that's the best utilization for Keon Coleman going forward. But even when he is on the outside, as you mentioned here, if there's pre-snap motion where, like, let's just say, for example, you've got Keon Coleman as the farthest outside on the line of scrimmage player, but that's at the snap, but then, Curtis Samuel has motioned inside at the snap, pre-snap. That's going to help dictate some matchups for Keon Coleman if he's in that condensed formation or if there is the motion. So that's good news for him. And, I've talked about this a lot lately, and, your favorite fantasy analyst probably hates this take, but the fact that Mac Hollins is involved in this receiver room seemingly out of early camp reports and everything like that, that matters, and it helps these other players a lot. Yeah, it's probably going to come at the expense of a guy like Khalil Shakir. Maybe he's not going to play as many snaps. That does suck because I like Shakir. I think he's a pretty good player. But they do kind of need that sacrificial X receiver if they're going to open up Keon Coleman to some of these routes that we want to see him running, the alignment that we want to see off the line of scrimmage and in the slot, etc. I wrote about this previously, that one of these guys from Mac Hollins, MVS, and even Chase Claypool had to emerge as sort of that sacrificial X receiver. It sounds like Mac Hollins is the early favorite there. He's not going to earn a lot of targets. We know that, but he is going to push the defense out. He's going to run these clear out routes and allow guys like Samuel and Keon Coleman, and especially Samuel. I'm really high on Curtis Samuel if you're a longtime RP subscriber. Another video is on this channel about Curtis Samuel. You can go check that one out. That's going to allow these guys to be in favorable situations. So I do think this is really good news. I've loved that report out of Bills camp. I think it's one of the most critical developments right now that I've seen so far in early training camp. All right, next question we've got from AJ Growny. If Matt LaFleur picked up the phone and gave you a call today asking, what should be my 2 wide receiver and 3 wide receiver set snap shares look like, what is your answer? Okay. I'm going to probably say that people are not going to like this answer, but I'm with Matt LaFleur. What he probably wants here is to rotate these players, and I do think he needs to rotate these players. I think all four of these guys, and shoot, like I don't have a RP profile on Bo Melton, but if they really like Bo Melton, they should get him on the field. I know that's gonna irritate people because we want like one wide receiver to emerge as a dominant target earner. I just don't think that's going to happen in this receiver room because they're all too good to just throw somebody by the wayside. Now, what I would say in terms of roles, two wide receiver sets, if Dontavian Wicks continues to perform in training camp like he performed on film last year and continues to earn that role, I do think I'd tell LaFleur that I'd love to see that guy play some X receiver in two receiver sets with Jaden Reed as your flanker. I think based on my charting from last year, those two guys have the highest upside in terms of being consistent, every snap, every route starters. But I'm also not going to just throw Romeo Doubs or Christian Watson by the wayside. What I would tell him about Watson is that I think Christian Watson, based on his reception perception charting and just the film overall through 2 years, is I do think he is a less is more player. I'm the guy I don't want in two receiver sets if I'm the Packers. And again, I'm doing this hypothetical consulting gig. Like Watson is not on the field for us consistently in two receiver sets because I don't think you're going to get the most out of him that way. I want to have him doing some slot work. I want to have him doing some off the line of scrimmage, pre-snap motion stuff, some more of the gadget stuff that Jaden Reed did. Let's put that on Christian Watson last year. Obviously not rush attempts and things like that, but screens and underneath targets. That's where I think you're going to get the most out of Christian Watson. So that's kind of my general overview of the Packers receivers. I think we do just have to accept this is going to be a rotation. One guy is not going to emerge, most likely, as a dominant target earner. They've got four pretty good wide receivers. In my opinion, based on charting them last year, I think right now, if I had to rank them, I would go definitely Wicks and Reed as the top two players, not in any order. I think there's a step down then to Doubs and Watson, but I understand why they like Doubs and the contributions that he brings as sort of that sacrificial X receiver who also has better ball skills in year 2 than he did in year 1. Next question comes in from Samwise. Love the handle here. Very simple. Is Davante Adams still elite? We love a simple question. And the answer for me is yes. Davante Adams is still an elite wide receiver in this league. I just charted Davante Adams. His profile is up on the site as we speak. It's a good one, folks. It's still very good. Now, it's not quite at the peak levels of his performance. That is to be expected. But we're still looking at a player who's at the 90th percentile in success rate versus zone, the 91st percentile in success rate versus press, and still at the 85th percentile in success rate versus man. Again, those are some slight dips, particularly as man coverage numbers a little bit down, but not in an area yet where we're starting to wonder about a decline. In my personal opinion, a guy who still wins, as the route chart shows, at an extremely high level on slants and curls and digs, while still also, unbelievable success rate on the post route, 87% success rate. He can still get down the field. I still like him as a true elite number 1 receiver in this league. Like when I talk about my tier 1 receivers, and if you listen to any of my shows, I bring this up a lot. Like the tier 1 to me is a small exclusive group. I do think Davante Adams still belongs in that first tier of receivers. Are guys like Justin Jefferson better than him? Yeah, I do think at this point Jefferson has taken a step ahead of him, but he's still right there with like CeeDee Lamb, with Jamar Chase, these other guys that are younger, obviously, and have clearly jumped into that, again, in my opinion, jumped into that elite tier of wide receivers. Let's go to our next question here. This one comes in from Stan Boston. Not a short question, but I do think this one is important to answer. Stan says Stan says it is a testament to RP's utility that the metrics are very stable and predictive year to year, which this is true. But have you seen any common traits or circumstances among those players who have showed well in reception perception at the beginning of their careers, but then quickly regressed? Stan throws out, obviously not counting injuries here, he throws out a few of examples that fit into this bucket. Rookie year, Jerry Jeudy. Rookie year, Chase Claypool. Year 1 to 2, Anthony Miller. He also throws in Marquise Brown and notes, though, that his subsequent RP seasons could have plausibly been injury-related. Those guys definitely come to mind. I will just note that, yes, I like all of these examples with the exception of Marquise Brown, who I think... So, yeah, Marquise Brown, I think I'll take a little bit of exception to him. I'll pull up his historic reception perception data right now. Yeah, definitely the rookie year success rate versus man number is the outlier of his career. And I mean, you could argue that he has declined pretty much almost every season in success rate versus man coverage. That being said, though, I think for the most part, like the press success rate numbers, the zone success rate numbers, with the exception of last season where I do think he was playing through some injuries last year. That's pretty commonly well known. I think he has pretty much shown us this is who he is as a player. That success rate versus man number as a rookie, when he wasn't really playing like a full receiver role, he was kind of being eased in. I do think that's kind of been an outlier for his career. So that would I don't know that it fits the same bucket of other players that I'm about to talk about here, because if you think about those other players that you mentioned here, Stan, Anthony Miller, Anthony Miller, Chase Claypool, Jerry Jeudy, I think we can honestly say that there's a little bit of like a knucklehead factor there with these guys. We'll pull up Anthony Miller's route chart here in a second, because I think that that's an important one to note with Anthony Miller here. This guy was really good early on in his career. Like, this is his 2019 route chart. I was very excited about Anthony Miller coming into the league as a prospect. He had really good reception perception prospect data. And then as a rookie, he had good data. 2019, he had a good data. I thought he was on the path to being a really good receiver in the league. But by all reports, he pretty much wore out that Bears coaching staff in Chicago. And like, look, you can be a nice, talented player on film, but like, you're still an unproven receiver for the most part. So that can get you pushed out. It's not too dissimilar to the Elijah Moore thing. Another guy who actually has a pretty similar profile to Anthony Miller. Elijah Moore, good player on film, good RP profile. We all know he wore out that Jets coaching staff, making a trade request in the middle of the season when they were on a 5-game win streak. Jerry Jeudy, I don't think has always been consistently focused on football. Chase Claypool, we know there's some stuff there too. So like, that's important to remember, that like there is an unidentifiable like kind of trait to players. Look, I am speaking out of turn a little bit. It's not like I know any of these guys. I'm just going off things I've heard, some things that are obvious out there with some of these players, but that's a part of this too. You could be a really good player, but if you're not ingrained and focused on football, you're not, you're wearing out that coaching staff a little bit, like in the Anthony Miller example we just gave. Yeah, that can definitely cause you to regress from your reception perception stats early on in your career. And that's definitely a big thing. So RP is not everything. It's a big part of it. Player ability is a big part of it, but also, yeah, just being a good teammate, being good in the locker room, and being an easy person to work with, working hard. That's all part of it as well. All right, next question here. This one is from NotNowChief. How do you factor in level of cornerback grading, or level of cornerback competition in your grading, if at all? If not, why not? Great question, NotNowChief. I do not factor level of cornerback competition into my grading. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, how would I do that? Unless I'm charting every single cornerback, how do I know how good every single cornerback is? I think if you follow reception perception, if you're a subscriber, if you're in the Discord and you see all the players that are being requested that I do not have time for because I'm a one-man show, you know that I do not have time to be charting cornerbacks at the same time. So am I using PFF grades? One, I don't necessarily have permission to do that. Number two, it's not as if these guys are all covered by the same player on every single snap. This is something we should talk about. We should talk about more. I don't think we talk about enough. That like the number one receiver isn't always covered by the number one cornerback on the team, especially as we know this, zone coverage rates are up, man coverage rates are down league wide. There's not those like shadow situations as often. So that's it. I don't really know a good way to account for it. The second thing is I promise you there are analysts that do this, but I am not one of them. I do not assume that my audience is stupid. Okay. I generally think if you're watching football content, you're a smart person. And I trust you to be, I think this should be intuitive that, yeah, Sky Moore, let's do the college example. Sky Moore, great reception perception profile, but he's playing at Western Michigan. You should assume there is some level of competition issues there. You're not, You're not going to compare Sky Moore's RP profile to Chris Olave's RP profile because there's a difference playing at Western Michigan versus at Ohio State. But even in the NFL, like, people get on me for my guy Josh Downs. Like, oh, I hear about how Josh Downs is so great, but you never talk about like the fact that he lines up in the slot. Well, if you read the website, that is mentioned that he's a slot player. That's why I chart alignment, and I say all the time that alignment is the starting point of everything. I assume you guys are smart and that you know that there is a difference between being a slot receiver and getting easier matchups versus being an outside perimeter X receiver. That also shows up in how often you get man coverage and how often you get press coverage. So I think that does account for cornerback competition and like the ease of your assignment, quote unquote. That's why I prefer to use reception perception on like an individual player basis than, oh, this guy's at 75% success rate versus man, and this guy's at 73%. Well, this guy at 75% is clearly better than 73%. That is not the case because that is just ripping out so much context that goes into each individual player profile. So I think what I do with reception perception is show you what the player does, like what the role is, and then how well they execute in that role. So for Josh Downs, just again, hell of an example here. He's in this slot receiver role where we know he's going against some easier cornerbacks. He's going against some linebackers and safeties, just softer coverage in general. And he's freaking awesome in that role. And I think that's good enough. I don't think that there needs to be, not just because it's a really difficult task to somehow on a snap by snap basis account for cornerback competition. Like, what is the adjustment you're making there? But number two, like, we know that this is how the wide receiver position works. At least we should. And I assume you guys are, because I assume that the people following and consuming my content are not idiots. I think highly of you guys. And that's why I don't account for cornerback grading when charting in reception perception. Next one up here comes from Cam. Who's your favorite defensive player? Answer that question and then read the rest. My favorite defensive player in the NFL, it's a tough one. I am going to go, though, with Myles Garrett, Cleveland Browns defensive end, edge rusher. Guy's just an absolute superstar. He's a technically proficient player now at this point, but he's also an athletic freak. So that's kind of my answer there. I think he's one of the best defensive players in the league. Okay. And the second part of the question here from Cam, great. That defensive player that you named is now your franchise's wide receiver 1 and is far superior to the rest of the receiving room. So how many games are we winning? I think we're winning a good amount of games here. We're going to scheme Myles Garrett into some, like we just said in the last question, we're going to scheme him into some soft matchups. We're going to make Myles Garrett our big slot receiver. We're going to use him tight, condensed to the formation. You're telling me Myles Garrett is not going to absolutely obliterate some nickel corners? There's a lot of good nickel corners in the league. Let's think about from a size advantage there. I mean, Myles Garrett's probably scoring, if he strictly focuses on playing wide receiver, he might even slim down a little bit. I think he's scoring 12 touchdowns. Okay. So how many games are we winning? That does depend on the rest of the supporting cast. But look, if he's by far and away the best threat that we have from a receiver perspective, we're playing him in the slot. We're going to get him on some of those easier matchups that we've been talking about. And I think he's going to crush in there. Like, I think our offense is going to be pretty good. If we can get down to the red zone, he's scoring us a lot of touchdowns here. Next question comes in from Ethan/Oscar Bobo. If Michael Pitman and Amon-Ra St. Brown switched teams, how differently would the Lions and the Colts have to think about their wide receiver rooms? They seem to be used pretty similarly, but obviously their body types are quite different. I actually think this is a really good question and made me think a little bit. Yeah, their body types are quite different, but I think that the way they're used is definitely similar, right? If you look at their route charts, you look at just kind of their alignment data. For Michael Pittman specifically, he runs a lot of these in-breaking routes. Like, this is the specialty of his game. Him and Puka Nacua actually have a kind of a similar route tree, and I think they're actually used in some similar ways in terms of the route percentage chart. I bet you most people would not think that, but that is the case. You look at Michael Pittman too. I think he's really successful on those in-breaking routes, but he's got an ability to win on post routes, out routes, corner routes. I think they can get some vertical stuff if the Lions had to take on Michael Pittman as their primary number one receiver. I think there's a little bit of a difference here Like, I think regardless of the tracking data, I think St. Brown's a better player. I think he's like a top of tier 2 receiver, but I also think Michael Pittman's like a top of tier 3 receiver, or maybe even a tier 2 receiver. I mean, his reception perception metrics are really good. But I think I actually do think he could hack it in that Amon-Ra St. Brown role. So if, like, for whatever reason, these two just switched places, I don't know that the Lions would have to switch up their offense too much. As a matter of fact, he might give them some more X receiver work. And again, so yeah, let's pull up St. Brown's route chart here. Pretty similar in terms of the route deployment. It's a lot of concentration on these shorter in-breaking and intermediate routes. He also can get open on posts. He can get open on dig routes. I think that's the thing that the Pitman might have a slight edge, is that I think he's a little bit better working on isolated situations on the outside than St. Brown. But I do think St. Brown's a little bit of a better zone beater and a little bit better underneath on these quicker routes. And I think he's more explosive after the catch than Amon-Ra St. Brown. So really, like, if these two switch places, that's a funny question. I actually don't think that either team would have to think about their offense differently. I think that St. Brown could be thrown into Michael Pittman's role, and I think Michael Pittman could be thrown into St. Brown's role. I'm not saying that the Lions just wouldn't lose a step or anything like that. But I do think that they play pretty similarly, and people might not necessarily think that off the top of their head. All right, let's go to Porker for our next question. Love that name. Rome Odunze has an amazing profile, but an unfortunate landing spots as far as being behind DJ Moore and Keenan Allen. What would it take for him to surpass DJ Moore and establish himself as the wide receiver 1? Just be really, really good. I think that's all it would take. This is a good question for a variety of reasons, because I think fantasy rankings right now just assume that DJ Moore is a top receiver. And I think odds are he is. I think he has a very strong case because he was awesome last year. He's always been a great player, but I think his last season was even a step up from his normal showing. So pretty safe assumption. But I don't think we're accounting enough for the fact, and look, maybe fantasy rankings are, and I'm speaking out of turn here, but I don't think we're accounting enough for the fact that everything in this offense is new. New quarterback, new offensive coordinator, a quarterback who's never played with DJ Moore, a quarterback who's never played with Keenan Allen, a quarterback who we know is a big fan of Rome Odunze, and I think they already have some chemistry with each other. I was talking with Jory Epstein at Yahoo on my podcast over there, and she was at Bears camp, and she was saying that consistently when Caleb works off script, even if Rome Odunze is not the first read, that's the guy he's usually leaning on. And look, that's like a anecdotal thing from training camp. It doesn't mean that that's going to be the case when we get to the regular season, but I think it's a worthwhile piece of data point that he has that much trust in Rome Odunze. Like, if Rome is as good as his prospect profile would indicate, and if you're a reception perception subscriber, really great profile. Okay. The all green route tree. He was my number 2 receiver in this class. He wins in all 3 phases, all 3 areas of the wide receiver position. He can win at slot. He can win at X. He can win at Z. He's great after the catch, very underrated after the catch, in my opinion. Great contested catch receiver. Checks all the boxes that you want. If he is this player in the NFL, he can be better than DJ Moore. This year, maybe aggressive, but pretty quickly. Because DJ is a good player, but he's not like a elite receiver in the league. I think he's maybe a tier 2 receiver, maybe a high tier 3 receiver. I'm still kind of working through his profile, so that is just worth noting, that piece of context there. But yeah, Rome just has to be really great individually, and he has to have the trust of the quarterback. And I think he could be the top performing receiver this year, next year, very early in his career. But yeah, I do think the odds on favorite to be the best receiver should be DJ Moore, just because where he is in his career, and we've seen him in the NFL. But if Rome is good, man, and like he hits ready to go day one from the jump, I think all bets are off. That could just be, he could just be the guy. I do think that's within the range of possible outcomes, even if it's not the favorite or most likely possible outcome. Next question comes in from Chev. What would it take for you to rank George Pickens above Drake London in redraft and dynasty? I think it would take them being two completely separate players. Like, I think if George Pickens was as good as Drake London, I would rank him higher in redraft and dynasty. I think if Drake London was, had the same areas of concern. I don't want to say concern, but just some of the limitations we've seen in George Pickens' game from an individual isolated perspective. Okay. Not talking about stats, I don't give a shit what he did from a yardage perspective with Kenny Pickett back there. Like all bad quarterback situations, all bad offensive situations are not created equal. Let's just get that out of the way. But George Pickens is still a guy that I think is a very, 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 very good wide receiver. I think he is one of the better non-elite X receivers in the league. I think he's definitely, I don't think he's a tier 2 receiver yet, but I don't think Drake London's a tier 2 receiver yet. I just think that the talent that London has shown from a isolated perspective, I think he's a better separator. That's for sure. He's definitely better against zone coverage. And he has also played as primarily a boundary X receiver. Any sort of situational aspects you ascribed to Drake London last year that held him back from a redraft or dynasty perspective, I think you have to apply those now to George Pickens. Russell Wilson, probably better than Desmond Ridder, but that's still an issue. Justin Fields, also probably better than Desmond Ridder or Marcus Mariota, but that's not a set in stone quarterback situation. We've literally seen what an X receiver who hogs the targets looks like in an Arthur Smith offense, and it looked like Drake London in year 1. It's fine from a production standpoint. Now Pickens, I think he's going to have higher weekly ceilings than that, but I think he's going to have lower weekly floors than that just because of the player that he is. Like, to me, my take on these guys individually comes back to who they are as players. And I think Drake London has shown us much more consistent quality play from an isolation perspective than George Pickens so far. So I don't really even see these guys as like a beyond just the situations and the offenses and all that stuff. I still think that London has shown us a lot more than Pickens at this point. And that's not a shade to Pickens, by the way. I think Pickens has been fine. Next question comes from Eagles Eric. What is the ideal ratio of slot snaps for AJ Brown and Devontae Smith? Love this question because I've been talking about this a lot, been thinking about this a lot in terms of what like the usage will be, who's the pre-snap motion receiver in this offense. I think my ideal kind of slot rate for AJ Brown is more than we've seen the last couple of years. But like I want to think about Tyreek Hill last year. He's at like a 30+% slot rate in reception perception. And he's the number 1 receiver who we know can beat press man, zone coverage, win at all 3 areas. But they use him inside to get him specific matchup situations. I'd like to see AJ Brown in that above 35% slot rate. And I'd like to see Devontae Smith somewhere around 20%, at least 20 to 25. I think it makes sense to get both of these guys slot routes to get some layups in there. AJ Brown, I think, could even kick up north to like 40+%. Because he's a really, really good just full field coverage beater. So is Devontae Smith. But I think you're more of a matchup nightmare if you're AJ Brown inside. So he's the guy I want to see have more snaps in the slot. But I think Smith, I still want to get them as well. The question we should have here about this, though, is who is playing outside for the Eagles if these two guys are getting slot reps? And that's why it's tough for me to think about Devontae Smith playing too much inside. Because if we're putting AJ Brown inside, like Smith has to be the X and vice versa, I guess. So maybe this applies to both these players, but the other receivers on this depth chart are like Paris Campbell and Aniyah Smith and Johnny Wilson, who's apparently had a quiet camp so far. Like those last 2 guys are rookies, and Paris Campbell is Paris Campbell, and he's like a slot only receiver. So I do wonder if that ends up being a little tricky in terms of getting these guys slot reps. Not that Devontae Parker, James Coe, wherever you are, is a needle moving player, but when he retired, they did lose that potential, like say it again, sacrificial X receiver who can play on the boundary and allow the offensive coordinator, in this case, Kellen Moore, to do some of the creative pre-snap snaps at flanker and slot for these 2 receivers. So I don't know. I do think that's my ideal ratio. I just wonder if the Eagles don't have like another outside body, like who are we throwing into that role there? I do think that's a little bit of a concern. Last question here. We always end on a non-football question here in the reception perception mailbag. Lightning_Panda814 says, what would you tell your 18-year-old self? Oh boy, what a deep question. What a deep question, Lightning Panda. But I'm so glad you asked, because what would I tell my 18-year-old self? I tell him to get in the gym. Okay. I tell him to get healthy earlier than I did. If you've read my pinned tweet, my story there, I used to weigh like well over 300 pounds. I've lost a lot of that weight now. At the time, I'd lost over 100 pounds. been bulking up a little bit this off season, adding some muscle. So, you know, I weigh more now than I did when I wrote that article. But the point of it is, health became a big part of my life way too late. I would say I was like 22 when I started the weight loss journey and getting down from over 300 into the mid and low 200s. I just should have done it earlier. Like that would be the number one thing I would tell my 18-year-old self is like, it's not cute being, as I wrote in this article, it's not cute being the funny fat friend. Okay. Like, I'm all about self-love and loving yourself and all this stuff. But like, buddy, and people don't take this the wrong way. I'm just talking to myself. 18-year-old Matt Harmon, you're going to be happier. You're going to feel better. Your life is going to be objectively better when you get in shape. Okay. So if you could do that at 18 as opposed to 22, like, earlier is always better. Earlier is easier. Earlier is just better for you long-term. So my number one thing I would say to myself is that get in the gym, get your diet under control, and you will be better off for it, just objectively. I mean, just it should not be a hot take to say that getting your health under control, losing weight, getting in shape is a good thing. So that's what I would tell my 18-year-old self. And, you know, if people out there are on a health journey, I'd love to talk to you about it. Like, I can't say that I'm going to be, you know, responsive to everybody or whatever, just because of time and schedule and everything. But, you know, this is something I'm very passionate about. I've talked a lot about it, and I'm glad you asked me this question because, yeah, I just think that even in this industry, like the fantasy content creation in general, I'm very passionate about talking about this because, you know, Evan Silva, if you guys know from ETR, he talked about this on his podcast when he took like a hiatus to get himself healthy. It's a very sedentary lifestyle, and people, I think, lean into that at times. It can be a very unhealthy lifestyle when you're just sitting at your desk all day at home. So I would really like, as an industry, and, you know, I need to think about more ways to be vocal about this and do things about this. But I just think we need to be more active as a society in general, and certainly within the NFL and fantasy community as well. I think it's something to talk about. So I'm glad you asked me this question, and definitely, yeah, I mean, 18-year-old Matt Harmon, bro, get it together. Your life's gonna be a lot better when you do lose that weight and you do get in shape. It's gonna be something that you really, really love. And if you could have done it 4 years earlier, would have been a good 4 years. This has been a great episode of Reception Perception, the mailbag. I appreciate you guys for sending in great questions. Reminder, if you want to be featured in future mailbag episodes, all you have to do is join the RP Discord. There should be a link in the description. Jump in, ask questions in the mailbag channel. And of course, subscribe to the website, receptionperception.com. We have so many more profiles that are coming up. I'm working on the Rashad Bateman profile. I'm working on the Josh Palmer profile. A lot of guys that are going to play sneaky big roles maybe this season will be coming to the website before our last call in late August, when there will be no more charting profiles updated. I really thought it would be fun to update more and more consistently this August and in previous August. So subscribe to the website and subscribe to the podcast, Reception Perception, the show, and this channel. Like this video, comment on the video, you know, support the channel. I appreciate you guys. Thanks a ton. See you in the next one.